Home Secretary, distinguished guests, colleagues, good afternoon to you all. In my speech today, I'm going to cover a number of issues. They're issues that you, our members, have raised with me as issues of concern. I can't cover them all, obviously, in the time that I've got today, but I will cover a number that I think are the highest priority. The first of these is the potential impact of future cuts on the policing service that we deliver on a daily basis. And I'll be calling for a constructive debate about how police forces might be organised in the future, not just so that we can meet the austerity measures, but so that we can do everything we can to improve the policing service that we give to the public and to continue to protect them from harm. I'm also going to talk about the blame culture in policing, and we've already heard a little bit about that during conference, but we need to move from a blame culture to a culture of learning, where people have some freedom and ability to make mistakes and admit mistakes. And finally, I'm going to touch upon something that we heard something about this morning. I'm going to talk about leadership and well-being and how we as senior leaders of the service can do our best to get the best out of our staff. But I'm going to talk to you first, just to share with you an event I was involved in earlier this year that meant a lot to me, and I just want to touch upon it with you. I took part in a charity cycle event in July this year, and it was the Police Unity Tour that was organised on behalf of the charity COPS, Care of Police Survivors. And there were 80 officers and survivors, i.e. families of people who died in the line of duty, who cycled from New Scotland Yard up to the National Memorial Arboretum. And every single rider in that group rode in the memory of an officer who died in the line of duty. And we all wore a bracelet engraved with the name of the person that we were riding for. I chose to ride on behalf of one of our former members, and some people aren't aware that a Superintendent Jerry Richardson from Lancashire Police was actually shot and murdered on duty when he attended an armed robbery in Blackpool in August 1971. Jerry was quite a rising star in the force. He was only 38 when he died, and he'd had an incredibly successful career until that point when it was cut short by an armed robber. So I rode in Jerry's memory, and it meant a lot to me, one, because I'm a Lancashire officer and he's from my home force, but two, because he's the only superintendent we're aware of that's been killed on duty in peacetime. A couple of weeks ago, I met Jerry's widow and I handed over the bracelet that I'd been wearing to her. And what was clear was just how incredibly proud she was of him and what he'd achieved. But she had a concern to me. She was concerned that as time moves on, and particularly as Jerry's generation of colleagues have moved on and passed on in many cases, that Jerry would be forgotten and his sacrifice would be forgotten. So I've given her a promise. I've promised that this association will make sure that we never forget the sacrifice that Jerry made. And of course, it's not just Jerry. There are many officers who sacrificed their lives. And later this month, I'll be attending the National Police Memorial Day service over in Belfast, along with many colleagues and others who are in this room. And that's my opportunity to pay my respects to every officer who's given their life to the job of policing, and we must never, ever forget them. But it's not just the big sacrifices. There are lots of little sacrifices that officers and staff all around the country make on a daily basis. Many of these will apply to you. How many times have you sacrificed an important family occasion because of work? How many times have you missed a family occasion that you planned to go to, but you got delayed at work? How many times does your family get woken during the night when you do because you need to authorise a firearms authority or a missing from home authority? And how many times are rest days cancelled at short notice that disrupt not just your activities, but those of your whole family? These are all sacrifices that police officers make every day across the country. And they do it because they're dedicated and committed to the vocation of being a police officer. They just say it goes with the territory and the privilege of being a police officer. And I think that sacrifice is something that, those sacrifices are something that we as senior leaders, just one of those little things we can do to make a difference in terms of just acknowledging and telling our staff that we recognise that they do make these sacrifices in the same way we do. I'll come back to some of those issues later on today. But I want to move on to the bigger picture now and talk about reform, police reform. And I'm a big fan of continuous improvement. I firmly believe that we should always be looking at what we do and seeing how we as individuals can be better and how our organisation can be better. But I do believe that if we're going to change, and I'm not averse to change or reform, but if we are going to change, it should be based on research and it should be based on evidence. There should be a good reason for looking to change. Unless, of course, we're trying to be innovative and try something new, in which case we need the freedom to do that. Now, we've seen lots of reform over the last 4 years. We talked about this at conference last year. And there have been a number of proposals from the government where we've actually expressed our objections to the proposals. And we've said we don't agree with it, we think there are risks. And on occasions, we've offered alternative proposals. There are some where we've actually agreed. The College of Policing is an example. We actually think it's a real benefit to policing to have a professional body that will help us professionalise the way we do our business, see policing being recognised as a profession. And I do think that Dame Shirley and Alex Marshall are the right people to get us to the place where the college needs to be. There are many challenges ahead of us. One of those challenges will be the buy-in of the membership of the college, and that's where you all have a role to play in helping them achieve what the college can achieve. They won't be able to do it without you. But it's not my job to tell politicians what's right or wrong. It's not my job to tell politicians what to do or how to do it. But I do have a professional responsibility for actually outlining professional judgment and for telling the government, or certainly the Home Office, what we think is right or wrong, where we think the risks are. And I made a plea last year at Conference Home Secretary. I asked you to listen to the service and to listen to what we said. And I'm pleased to say that that does happen. There are a couple of examples I can give from this last year. One in relation to mental health, where we had a conversation about the restrictive powers that the Mental Health Act gave police officers to deal effectively with certain mental health situations. The Home Secretary instigated a review of mental health legislation, and I look forward, along with colleagues, to seeing what the government's response to that consultation is in relation to mental health. I think that could make a real difference to officers on the front line. And the other area was in relation to compulsory severance, where I know the whole service was waiting with bated breath earlier this year when the Police Arbitration Tribunal made a recommendation that the service should not go ahead with compulsory severance for police officers. We felt we'd made our case very strongly both to the Police Arbitration Tribunal and separately to the Home Secretary. I'm delighted, Home Secretary, that you took the decision to accept that recommendation from the Police Arbitration Tribunal, and I'm grateful for that. I hope that you continue to listen to the service should that issue ever be resurrected in the future. But the biggest issue for the service in the future isn't necessarily the reform that's coming down the line, but it's the cuts. It's what the next comprehensive spending review, what the next comprehensive spending review might mean for the service. Nobody at the moment can tell us what the scale of those cuts might be. There's quite a lot of speculation out there, some of it saying that it might be exactly the same as we've had in the last 4 years. But whoever makes that decision about the scale of cuts for policing must understand the impact that those cuts are going to have on how effectively we can deliver policing and protect the public from harm. Now, there's certain people in the service been accused of scaremongering in the past when they've talked about the risk that cuts to policing might bring. I'd like to think that that can't be said about us, because I think we've always been fairly rational. We've accepted that the police service had to take its fair share of the cuts. We have said that we felt it was too deep and that actually the cuts went too far. But nevertheless, I don't think we've ever been accused of shroud waving or scaremongering. But I did, at last year's conference, say that the service was at full stretch. We're a year on, and I still believe that to be the case. And I'm really concerned about what the future might hold. If you just look at our membership as an example, we've taken a 25% cut in the number of superintending ranks across the country, across England and Wales. That's over 400 of people like you who do the job out there on a daily basis to lead the service. We had a presentation this morning about our personal resilience survey, and the results of that are quite worrying in some areas. It said that 98% of you felt that you had a very high workload. It said that 89% of you said that that workload had increased in the last year. 77% of you are already working excessive hours. And 58% of you have said that you don't feel you've got sufficient resources to do your job. I don't think any of those are going to improve if the police service faces further cuts in the next CSR. There are 16,000 fewer police officers out there, with over 8,000 of them being removed from the front line. There are 18,000 or more fewer police staff. There are far fewer people to deliver the policing service that we would like to deliver to the public. Yes, we've taken £2.5 billion out of the policing budget, and we're more efficient for that, and that's a good thing. There's no doubt at all that there's been some benefits to making the service more efficient. But what we hear quite often from time to time at the moment is the mantra that crime is down and reform is working. Well, you in this room know that, yes, in some areas crime is down. In some areas, crime is going up. The question to be asked is, what crime is there out there that we know nothing about? The cybercrime that we know is out there, but probably not being recorded on the scale that it should be. We heard this morning about human trafficking and the fact that there's human trafficking happening in every force, but quite a lot of that will not be being crime because we simply don't know about it yet. We had a police minister recently, a Home Office minister recently, saying that crime is down, therefore police officers have got spare capacity. Well, I'd like anybody in this room to tell me which of your staff feel that they've got free capacity, because they certainly haven't. Because what we've got is a change in demand for policing. We've got other organisations who are shrinking apart from policing. Everybody's facing cuts, everybody's pulling back slightly, and actually it tends to be the police, the 24/7 police, that pick up the pieces from other organisations that can no longer fulfil their obligations. Chief constables are being asked to shrink budgets significantly, and in doing that, they're doing lots of restructuring in their own forces. But what they're doing is restructuring locally in a national structure that they're handcuffed to because it's never been changed for 40 years. And that's clearly restricting their ability to reduce budgets in a more effective way. We've got 43 forces across England and Wales. That means 43 headquarters buildings, 43 chiefs, 43 deputies, 41 PCCs, and all the infrastructure that they have. In my view, that's a waste of public money that could be being spent on frontline operational policing. Yes, forces are looking at collaboration, and they have been for a number of years. And many of you are working hard in collaborative arrangements to try and deliver policing that protects the public. But the reality is, it's piecemeal, it's ad hoc. There is no consistency at all across the service in relation to how collaboration is taking place. Some of it's with the private sector, some of it's with the public sector, some of it's with other forces. We're also finding there are a number of police and crime commissioners who are now withdrawing from existing collaborative arrangements because they don't feel it's in the best interest of their force. Or they're choosing not to go ahead with new collaborative proposals because they don't think it's in the best interest of their force. There needs to be a way of looking at the greater good above what's right for one individual force. And of course, we've got strategic alliances that are happening in more than one place now in the country. And again, our members who are parts of those alliances are working really hard to make them work. But the reality is, where two forces are in an alliance, you still have two deputies, two chiefs, two police and crime commissioners. And that's because the legislation is restricting the level of change that can be made in those areas. We heard it earlier, we've still got members of ours who are commanding more officers in their BCU or command unit than some chief constables are commanding, with all the headquarters infrastructure and ACPO team and everything that goes along with it. We've got one of our members who commands a BCU that's got more officers in it than 11 forces in the country. That's 25%, a quarter of all forces, with one chief superintendent commanding it. That just can't be right. It can't be right, and it's not sustainable into the future. To put it bluntly, we're wasting public money, and there must be a better way of organising policing that actually saves us money and will protect us that bit more from the next round of cuts. Even the HMIC have recognised this. They spoke in the Value in the Police report back in July about the fact that there's concern about the viability of some forces in the future if further cuts come along and the service hasn't reorganised the way it's funded or the way it delivers policing. HMIC have also said that it's time for a debate, a constructive debate about how policing is funded and organised in the future. I fully support that call for a debate, and we would want to be a key player in that debate, because you, our members, you see it every day, the challenges that trying to deliver policing on that reduced budget present for you. And I think that we could be a really effective key player in that discussion. But whatever comes out of that, and I've been asked a number of times by the media in recent days, how many police forces should there be? That's not for me to decide. That's a decision that should be based on evidence and based on research. And that evidence and research needs to be done sooner rather than later, because we're walking into the next CSR within the next 12 months. Now, last year at conference, I mentioned neighbourhood policing. Neighbourhood policing is a really critical part of how we deliver policing in this country. It's an important part of the model. And last year I spoke about the importance, I don't need to repeat it to people in the room. You understand how important it is in gaining trust and confidence of communities. You understand how important it is in providing support for crime investigation and prevention, not just at a local level, but at a regional level, at a force level, even at a national level. Chief officers are having to make really difficult decisions. I know every chief constable would love to keep a gold-plated neighbourhood policing model, but they can't do that. They can't do that because of all the other demands being placed on them. If you look at the presentations we've had around modern-day slavery, if you look at the expansion of problems around child sexual exploitation, which are coming to the fore now, again, things that we didn't really know about but were happening. These are all really high-risk parts of the organisation where you can't prioritise one against another. They're all so important. And chiefs are having to make those difficult decisions about how they use their shrinking budgets to best protect the public. They're in a no-win situation, effectively, because whichever area they decide to cut back on, they'll come in for criticism somewhere along the line. I know that there are public fears about talks about restructuring policing, and the public's fears tend to lie with the concern about losing that neighbourhood policing model, losing their local officers. There's no evidence to suggest that happens in larger forces. There are plenty of larger forces represented here, Metropolitan Police, West Midlands, Greater Manchester, all large forces that have really effective neighbourhood policing models. Just because a force headquarters is some distance from your local area doesn't mean that you're not going to get local policing. I can understand those fears, but I think we have to do something about informing the public of the reality of how policing might be organised in the future, but retaining that neighbourhood policing model at the heart of how we deliver policing. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that there are no challenges around restructuring policing. There are challenges around the IT infrastructure. There are challenges if we keep it at 43 forces, but there are bigger challenges if we try and go to fewer forces. There are issues about the precept and balancing the precept differences. And of course, there are issues around governance, because we now have a Police and Crime Commissioner model in place. And how do we gain governance at the right level across policing? What I would say is, you can't let those things stand in the way of the debate. Yes, there are things that need to be thought through, but let's at least have the debate. Let's have the discussion and think through what other options there might be for delivering policing. As we move towards the next CSR, I know there are people out there who will be saying we can't afford to reorganise or restructure policing. I would argue that we can't afford not to. If we reorganise policing, one of the things we will need to address, and we need to address this anyway, is organisational culture. And again, throughout today, the last couple of days at conference, culture has been mentioned. Everybody here knows how passionate I am about valuing difference. And I'm not alone in asking or striving to achieve a workforce that properly represents the communities that we serve. But if we're going to go down that line, if we're going to accept that we need to represent our wider communities, then we need to accept that everybody is capable of making mistakes. The service has come in for increased scrutiny over recent years in terms of pretty much everything we do. And to be fair, I welcome that. I think the more open and transparent we can be for the public, the better. We should be accountable to the public. We've actually called for serious disciplinary cases to be heard in public to improve that transparency with an independent chair of the panel. I hope that Major General Clive Chapman will consider this as part of his review of disciplinary procedures. But whatever scrutiny there is of policing, it needs to be fair. The public need to recognise that actually, quite often, the police service are in a no-win situation. And we had a great example of that last week in Hampshire, when the little boy Asia King was taken from the hospital by his parents. No matter what Hampshire Constabulary did in that situation, they would have been criticised by somebody. And that's very common in policing, that we have no-win situations where we just need to do what we think is best, based on the information we have and in the situation that we're in. And people need to recognise that. There also needs to be an acceptance that people do make mistakes and that police officers are human, just like everybody else. At the moment, we've got a culture where if something goes wrong or somebody makes a mistake, there's a rush to point the finger of blame. That rush to point the finger of blame leads to us losing the ability to take risks, losing the ability to learn from what we do and to have the confidence to make difficult decisions. It's really important that people recognise that we are only human. In any job, people get things wrong, people make mistakes. It's just human nature. But it's how people and how organisations learn. The default position, where there's a focus on blame and quite often a disproportionate response to an incident, doesn't help anybody. If we're going to try and improve policing, as we want to do through the College of Policing, then we need to be able to make mistakes and try new things. Evidence-based policing is based on people trying new things. We can't do that if every time something goes wrong, people are fearful of the consequences. We mustn't create or accept such an environment where people fear those consequences. Now, there are many quotes about failure and the importance of failure in learning, and there's one particularly from an American author that I like. And it's don't be afraid to fail. Don't waste energy trying to cover up a mistake. Learn from your failures and go on to the next challenge. It's okay to fail. If you're not failing, you're not growing. And I think that's a mantra that the police service needs to adopt in the future if we're going to change how we do things. Now, let me be absolutely clear. I am not proposing that we scrap disciplinary process and the disciplinary regulations. Actually, they're really important, but they're important for the really bad cases of misconduct and, in particular, corrupt behaviour. We need to differentiate between people who genuinely make a mistake and people who are really bad. We can't tolerate corrupt police officers, and we don't tolerate corrupt police officers. We've shown that we can actually root them out and exit them from the police service, and we'll continue to do that with vigour in the future. But wrongdoing is what the police disciplinary process is for, not necessarily for somebody who does the wrong thing, and there is a difference. I hear too many times of officers who've been served a gross misconduct notice and who are subjected to an often gruelling investigation, where the outcome at the end of the day is the same as it would have been if it had been dealt with in a much more proportionate manner in the first couple of days that it came to notice. But of course, what we've got is a negative culture. We've got a culture where people are far less likely to take risks or admit mistakes, and that will continue if we continue as we do at the present time and don't look to learn. What I'm asking for is a greater understanding from those people who scrutinise policing, the IPCC, HMIC, the Home Office, the media and the public. Greater understanding of that difference between somebody who's bad and corrupt and somebody who makes a genuine mistake. We need to create that environment where we can learn instead of blame. And there are other organisations that have already done this. The Air Accident Investigation Branch has a purpose that is about seeking to find the cause, and it explicitly says it is not to find blame or liability. As a result of that, pilots are very willing to admit when they've done something wrong, admit a mistake that leads to a near miss, because they know that it'll prevent tragedy in the future. We need to find a way of doing that. We've now got the Code of Ethics, which when you put it alongside the National Decision Model, it provides a framework for us. But we'll never change without changing leadership behaviours. Leadership behaviours both inside the service and behaviours from those outside the service who scrutinise us. We need a much more open and supportive environment in which to operate. I really hope that the reviews of the police disciplinary process and, more importantly, the police complaints process listen to our proposals, consider what we are saying, and that this will help us move to a different culture. If we do, it'll be for the benefit of the public, and that's what's most important. I now want to move on to leadership and well-being, and I think most in the room were here for this morning's session about personal resilience and about well-being. And I think you'll agree it's quite clear there's a clear link between leadership and well-being. And it's everybody in a leadership role in the service, it's everybody's responsibility to provide positive leadership to the people who work for us. Everybody at every single rank, at every single grade, has that responsibility, especially in these really difficult times, to provide positive leadership to the people who work for us. This is no small ask, but with rank comes responsibility. And people need to recognise that, and I don't think everybody in the service does. Yes, I know we've got angry officers out there who are really angry at the way that their pay and pensions and conditions have all been reformed. There are officers who are frustrated about the fact there's fewer of them on the street, fewer police staff to support them do their job properly. And some of them feel really let down by more senior officers, such as us, who they think have failed to stop this from happening. And we've got police staff colleagues who, for the first time, certainly in my service, are being made compulsory redundant or have the threat of redundancy hanging over them while they continue to do their job. These are really difficult times for policing. But as the senior operational leaders of the service, it's our responsibility to look outwards and forwards, outwards to the public and forwards to the future. It's what comes with the privilege of the rank that we hold. We have a job to keep people safe and secure. We all know how critical that is to building trust and legitimacy. But trust isn't permanent. Trust can be so easily damaged. And it only takes one negative media report or a negative encounter with a police officer for that trust to be damaged. And when we see a negative media report about policing, I'm sure every one of us in this room feels hurt by that. And that damages that trust, which means that we have to work that bit harder to try and regain it again. And it's not just our job to build trust, it's everybody in policing's job to build that trust. Every single officer or member of staff who comes into contact with the public has a responsibility to help build trust and improve confidence in policing. Every single encounter is an opportunity to do that. And despite reports of police failings in the media, and yes, there have been too many in recent months, despite those reports, we all know that every single day our officers go out there and do amazing things that often go unrecognised. And that's where we come in. As leaders, we need to be looking forward. We need to be leading staff towards the new police service. Policing will still exist when we've moved on. We are but guardians for the time being. Yes, it will be different in the future. Yes, there'll be fewer people. Yes, there'll be less money. But I can guarantee you there will still be a policing service delivering policing that protects and serves the public of England and Wales. We must never shirk our duty to make sure that that policing service remains for the next generation. And one thing we must never do is put our personal gain ahead of that duty. There are things all of us can do as leaders to try and help move the well-being agenda forward, and Andy Rhodes touched upon a few of those this morning. There are some quick wins, as he calls them, some fairly simple things that we can start to do. The first thing is within your area, create an environment where people feel confident, if they don't already, that you'll actually genuinely listen to their concerns, that we don't treat people who challenge us as dissenters or disloyal. We actually give them a chance to air their views. I know there's a lot of people out there who feel that they can't do that in the service at the current time. We need to recognise the really small but important things that officers do on a daily basis and make sure that they feel valued and appreciated, because those things are acknowledged in a very small way. It doesn't take much, but these little things will make a difference to how people feel in the workplace. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here, because I know that all of you in this room do these things all the time. Maybe we don't. I know when I was a really busy BCU commander, some of these things you intend to do get slipped by. Actually, these are the things that can really make a difference to staff. And at a time when they're feeling particularly vulnerable, it's just one of those little things that we can do. I'd really like you to go back and think about the session we had earlier around wellbeing, and think about what you can do as senior operational leaders to change in your area. Even if you can't change the whole force, just change in your area the way things are. Andy said this morning that wellbeing is an opportunity and a risk. We need to take the opportunity and manage the risk around introducing wellbeing. It's an integral part of the role of a senior leader to care for your staff. And there are links to organisational justice, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, which quite clearly says that if you treat your staff in a way that makes them feel valued, then the way they treat the members of the public will be exactly the same. And that will benefit everybody. Clearly, leadership is far more complex than just these few pointers that I've mentioned today. But when we've got fewer officers out there, it's more critical than ever that we invest in them, that we get the best out of them, because we still need to keep the communities of England and Wales secure and protected. And it's the role of a leader to make this happen. In conclusion, we've had a challenging 4 years. I don't think I'm naive to say we're going to have another challenging few years ahead. There's no doubt at all about that. I'd like to give my personal thanks to every officer and member of staff out there who's done their best to serve the public the best that they possibly can. We should all be proud to be police officers in this environment, despite what's happening to the police service out there, despite the kicking that we get in the media on a fairly regular basis. We should still be proud of being police officers in this country, because it is the best police force in the world. We've got more challenges ahead. There's no doubt about that. As your president, I'll continue to do my best to work hard on your behalf. I'll share our professional judgment with key decision makers. I'll let them know where we don't agree with some proposals. We'll identify the risk, and we'll do our best to persuade them of alternatives to the proposals that they may be making. On occasions, we won't always be heard, but I shall do my best to try. And in return, I know that you will all continue to provide the best possible leadership to those officers and staff that are out there making a difference to and protecting and serving our communities on a daily basis, because that's what British policing does best. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Irene. And it is a pleasure to be here at the Supers Conference again. May I first echo your words, Irene, about the importance of the National Police Memorial Day service. It is indeed an important and moving occasion, and it reminds us that we should never forget those officers who've given their lives in the line of duty. In 2010, not long after the general election, I gave my first full address to this association. I was clear then that a great many challenges and changes lay ahead. I was straight with you about the need for spending cuts, but I also promised changes that would improve the police for the better. That my programme of reform is about giving you back operational control so that you can do what you do best, get on with fighting crime. And you have. And I will repeat that crime is down by more than 10% since the last election, proving that it is possible to do more with less. You have adapted your ways of working to best deploy resources and deliver savings. You've been your link between the officers on the ground and important national issues, such as organised crime and child protection. You've worked with other agencies on issues such as mental health to ensure your colleagues can focus on policing. And you've worked to change the face and culture of the police to make it more diverse and better reflect our communities. You rolled up your sleeves and got on with the job at hand. So I want to thank everyone in this room for your hard work and steadfast commitment to serving the public. And of course, there remains much to do. So today I want to talk to you about the importance of the police maintaining the momentum of reform. Now, looking back now, it's easy to forget why reform was so necessary in the first place. In 2010, the country faced a grave financial crisis and the worst budget deficit since the Second World War. We had a higher deficit than any other country in Europe, with the single exception of Ireland. And countries such as Portugal and Greece, which had lower deficits than ours and had to ask the European Union for a bailout, still have economies that lag behind. So we took tough and necessary action. That meant spending cuts across the public sector, and yes, the police have had to carry their share of the burden. But reform has always been about much more than spending cuts. And when we consider what we inherited in 2010, we can see that the case for reform was compelling. When we arrived at the Home Office, we identified a host of issues that needed urgent attention. Police productivity weighed down by bureaucracy and undermined by too much red tape. Institutions and structures that were inadequate. An unaccountable system of governance. Wasteful procurement. And a system of police pay that had been devised more than 30 years earlier. So in addition to the work we're doing to improve ethical standards in policing, our programme of police reform has amounted to a systematic attack on each of these 5 problems. We've ripped away reams and reams of oppressive bureaucracy. National targets, key performance indicators and excessive regulations are gone. Invisible, undemocratic police authorities have been replaced with local accountability through elected police and crime commissioners, crime maps and beat meetings. The National Policing Improvement Agency is no more. In its place is the College of Policing, a proper professional body with a clear remit to drive up standards and establish an evidence base for what works. HMIC is now more independent of both the government and the police, meaning it can shine a light on inefficiency and poor practice, as well as speak hard truths to the Home Office. The Independent Police Complaints Commission has been beefed up so that in future it can take on all serious and sensitive cases. The new National Crime Agency has the power to coordinate and task law enforcement organisations and assets so that we can get to grips with serious and organised crime. We've strengthened regional crime units, regional organised crime units, so that they can work alongside the NCA and their local police forces. And direct entry is opening up the senior ranks of the police and bringing in new talent, skills and expertise. But we still have some way to go. We've made headway on procurement and police ICT, but much work remains to be done to deliver better value for money for the taxpayer. HMIC's report last week, Core Business, made for sobering reading. Victims and communities have a right to expect the police to investigate crime and pursue criminals as far as possible. And it's imperative that we improve information management to give officers the right intelligence on the front line. The recent appalling revelations from Rotherham have highlighted terrible failures by the police, Rotherham Council and other agencies to protect vulnerable children. And I have made clear this is a complete dereliction of duty. And I trust that the independent inquiry, whose chairman I announced on Friday, will look at these failings so that we can learn the lessons and put an end to these disgusting crimes whenever they occur. And our work on stop and search is not yet complete. It is never acceptable for powers to be used inappropriately or people to be stopped and searched based on their appearance. That's why the Best Use scheme, which I launched in August, is so important, and why I'm delighted that every force signed up to it voluntarily. So we must go further, But police reform is working. As I said, overall crime is down by more than 10% under this government, according to both the Independent Crime Survey and Police Recorded Crime. The most recent crime survey data estimated that there were 7.3 million offences in 2013-14, a 62% fall since the peak in 1995, and the lowest level since the survey began in 1981. Our reforms have been radical and wide-ranging, but most importantly of all, they have been utterly necessary. Now, I know that you may not always have agreed with me, and I know that change isn't always easy. I know it can be difficult, disconcerting, and unsettling. And that's why I've always appreciated the way you have worked constructively with us to deliver reform that works. But while these changes may not have been of your choosing, change doesn't always have to be stressful and difficult, and nor does it need to be something that is imposed upon you from above. Because when you look at the reforms we've introduced, what they amount to is an irreversible transfer of power from the Home Office to you, the police. An end to Home Office interference, central diktats, and a government knows best attitude. Professional discretion over a raft of charging decisions. Police-led prosecutions to cut the time you have to spend waiting for the CPS. The College of Policing, led by the police for the benefit of the police, with a broad remit covering training, standards, and leadership. The Police Innovation Fund, set up so that forces could come up with new and innovative ideas themselves, rather than having them foisted upon you. I've stripped away power from the Home Office and put you in charge of police practice. Because I don't believe it is the role of the Home Office to tell you how to do your job. You are the professionals, and you use your judgment to best fight crime in your area. Even as we've cut spending, you have helped to cut crime, showing, as I say, that it is possible to do more with less. While the debt crisis we inherited made savings necessary, it's acted as a driver for change, encouraging forces to streamline processes, cut unnecessary spending, and to look not just at what they deliver, but how they deliver it. And this is important, because it is clear that whatever the outcome of the next election, police spending will have to fall again, as even Labour have admitted. And if there is one important lesson we can learn from this government, it is that reform is often possible because, not in spite, of spending cuts. In the next Parliament, we know to expect further reductions. So we're going to need to challenge old ways of thinking, review established processes, and find the ways to make the best use of the resources that are available. We're going to need to develop ever smarter and more efficient ways of doing things. But if budgets are simply cut without police forces using that as an opportunity to do things differently, then the service will deteriorate. So I want to see more proposals for reform coming from inside police forces themselves, reform by the police for the police. That's why I'm delighted to support initiatives such as Police Now, an idea conceived by 2 frontline officers in the Metropolitan Police to attract bright young graduates into policing. The scheme will launch later this month in London, with the intention that it will be rolled out to other forces across the UK in the future. And I hope it will encourage people who would not normally consider a career in policing to apply, bringing in with them fresh ideas and new ways of thinking. Police Now itself stemmed from another example of the police reforming for themselves, the Commissioners 100. This forum of officers and staff meets regularly to feed the best ideas from the front line directly to the Met's senior officer team. On a larger scale, the £50 million Police Innovation Fund encouraged police forces to come forward with new schemes to improve policing from within. Successful bids have ranged from body-worn video to mobile IT, and from integrated emergency services to responding to rural crime. And I know that you, the supers, have championed change, particularly on diversity, and making policing a profession where people from different backgrounds can get on and thrive regardless of their gender, race, or sexuality. I'm grateful for your work with us on direct entry to open up the senior ranks of the police. I know that you recently observed the selection process for direct entry superintendents at the National Assessment Centre, and I hope that you were impressed by the quality of the candidates being put forward for leadership roles. I also hope that you are engaging actively with the fundamental review of police leadership being undertaken by the College of Policing. Your expertise on how we can go further and faster with direct entry, open up the senior ranks of the police to people from different backgrounds, and encourage officers to gain experience outside of policing before returning later in life will be invaluable. And your support on priority issues, such as early intervention and vulnerable people, is also greatly appreciated. And thank you, Irene, for your comments on the government's response on mental health. There is an increasing evidence base from street triage and liaison and diversion pilots that reform can deliver real improvement in the care of vulnerable people and reduce the amount of police time spent on such incidents. And next month, I will be hosting a joint summit with Black Mental Health UK to explore further options for reform in this important area. So you are demonstrating loudly and clearly that you can be a force for change, a force for making the police work more effectively and efficiently. And I hope that in the future we will see even more new ideas. As I've said, the Home Office no longer believes it runs policing. You, the professionals, do. But I also recognise that even in a more localised landscape, there are some reforms that only the Home Secretary can deliver. And I'm thinking here of force structures. Now, I know that some, including the Superintendents Association, and we've heard it again this afternoon, have said that we must revisit the debate about the 43 force model and think about doing more at a regional level. I've always said that if forces come to me with a coherent and comprehensive plan to merge forces at local level with local support, I would consider it, and that invitation remains open. But let me be clear. No Chief Constable or Police and Crime Commissioner has come forward in the last 4 years with a jointly agreed proposal, viable or otherwise, to merge with another force. And in fact, the opposite is true. Chief Constables and Police and Crime Commissioners are demonstrating that all the perceived benefits of mergers are possible without sacrificing local accountability and identity. Because what would we be trying to achieve by merging police forces? If it is to deliver efficiencies, just look at Warwickshire and West Mercia. These two forces have entered an alliance which allows them to pool all of their resources below the level of Deputy Chief Constable. They share not just back office functions, but also investigations, command teams, neighbourhood policing, and a host of other activities. And earlier this year, they even opened a joint police and fire station in Bromsgrove. HMIC has called this collaboration groundbreaking, and it is expected to deliver 32% and 47% of each force's respective savings by March 2015. And in both forces, crime continues to fall. Last financial year, police recorded crime fell across both forces by 3%, and since 2010, both have seen it fall by more than 10%. If it is economy of scale we're looking for, then look to the East Midlands Strategic Commercial Unit, which buys services on behalf of Derbyshire, Northamptonshire and Nottinghamshire Police collaboratively. These forces and others like them are showing that shared procurement and common commissioning is possible across force boundaries, not just within them. Or if it is to deliver increased capability and interoperability, look at Surrey and Sussex. These forces now collaborate on major crime investigations, forensics and firearms, as well as back office activity like procurement. They're planning to extend joint working to include surveillance, police dogs and high-tech crime in the near future. And as HMIC said in July, the forces share a joint vision to work as one operationally and organisationally. There are many other examples up and down the country, yet all of them retain local accountability to the elected Police and Crime Commissioner and maintain their identity to the public through a local force model. They show categorically that the alleged benefits of bigger forces, greater efficiencies, economies of scale or increased capability, can be delivered through collaboration. This is the model for police reform in the future. Common systems, shared procurement, working across force areas, integration with other emergency services and joint capability. In Warwickshire and West Mercia, these benefits have already been accrued. The only thing left on the table is the loss of local identity and local accountability. And those who don't believe me should heed the warning signs from the past. When Charles Clarke was Home Secretary in 2006, Labour's proposal to create 24 so-called super forces was dropped after opposition to the £500 million transition costs and the removal of local policing. As HMIC said in their Valuing the Police report in July, there is still a long way to go in driving collaboration between forces at local level. I applaud the efforts of Chief Constables and Police and Crime Commissioners to work together so far and urge them to go further, both between forces and with other emergency services. But the evidence is clear. Big top-down restructure is simply not the answer. Now, I've talked today about the reforms that I've introduced, and they have been radical, but we cannot stop reform here. We must continue to change policing for the better. From your ranks, the next generation of chiefs will emerge, and I want you to see yourselves as the vanguard of further change, not the recipients of it. Our role has been to create the right framework in which you can act. We've given you greater control, greater freedom, and greater discretion. My reforms are about making the police better, better for you and better for the public. And as operational leaders today and future leaders tomorrow, police officers will look to you for guidance and support. I hope that you will be able to bring your workforces with you through the transitions that lie ahead. We have achieved a great deal, but there is still a long way to go.
Thank you very much indeed, Home Secretary. Questions from the audience, please stick your hand up. We'll get the mics to you as quickly as we can. Just a quick one from me, if I may, Home Secretary, on the question of restructuring. You made your views very plain indeed, but you also heard what Irene had to say. What Irene had to say, if I could paraphrase it, is that you are merely tinkering with the problem. These are ad hoc, piecemeal changes in the structure of police forces, and really, as a nation, cannot afford not to go with the whole hog. It works in Scotland. Why wouldn't it work here?
Well, I think I made that clear, my view on that clear in the remarks I've just made, John, which is that I have always thought that it is possible to achieve the benefits of the economies of scale, the benefits of working together through greater collaboration between forces while retaining local identity and local accountability. I think that is what is happening up and down the country, and I understand the point that Irene made, that this is happening in different groupings and in different ways, and different forces are looking to collaborate in different ways. There is no one single model. But that's what local accountability and local decision is about.
But there's no lack of accountability in Scotland, apparently. There's no lack of local accountability in Scotland, apparently. No one's saying, screaming out, saying, I'm not being looked after by the police force just because it's gone national. Scotland
have chosen to go down the route of having a single force. It's been in place, and I think it's about 18 months that Police Scotland has been in place. I believe that it is would not be right for the Home Office to stand up and try and impose on forces some sort of restructuring. I think it is important that we allow that local accountability and local identity to be retained, and that but that we recognise, if, as I've said, and we've said this right from the beginning, if forces come up to us with a proposal which has local support, which is viable, which has a business case, then of course we will look at it.
Enough of me. Got a question down there. Who is it? Would you care to stand up, please, so the cameras can see you? Thank you very much. Tell us who you are and your question or your comment.
I'm Secretary Jackie Alexander, Head of Professional Standards Directorate in Nottinghamshire Police. My time as Head of Professional Standards has made me convinced that there is no one more committed to driving out police corruption than those of us who join to serve the public and protect the vulnerable. And the College of Policing's Disapproved Register provides clear evidence that we can be effective in achieving this. Independence is part of the journey towards an effective investigation, but it increasingly feels to me that it is being mistaken as the objective, as the destination. I do not fear independent investigation, but I do fear inadequate investigations that fail to drive out corrupt officers. My question is this. Why are we moving all serious and sensitive investigations to the IPCC and leaving only low-level complaints to the police, when there is no evidence to show that any independent non-police body can match the skills, expertise and determination of police investigators, There is no evidence to show the police are not already using those skills to root out corruption. And when recent reviews have already questioned whether the IPC is fit for purpose, whether their investigations have actually increased public trust and confidence, and when no additional resources can actually improve investigative expertise.
OK, Jackie, thanks very much indeed. Home Secretary.
As you may know, that I have announced that we are doing a review of the whole complaint system. And this is partly because, obviously, we have given more responsibility to the IPCC through the serious and sensitive cases, and resources are moving to the IPCC. There are also a number of initiatives being taken by police and crime commissioners within force areas to establish, for example, ethics committees or alternative complaint system, complaints procedures. So I thought it was right to actually look across the board at the complaint system that we have at the moment. We all want to ensure that those few officers who are corrupt officers are identified and that appropriate action is taken. But there has been a concern from the public in the past about a number of aspects of this, two in particular, both of which we have been dealing with. One was the concern that an officer who might have been guilty of misconduct could actually just retire or resign, and then the case wouldn't be pursued against that officer. So we have now changed that and made it clear that cases should continue to be pursued, and having the struck-off register is important here so that we don't see situations such as we have seen of an officer if you like, avoiding that misconduct procedure and then being re-employed by a different force. And I think it's important that we've changed that. And the other issue for the public is about the police investigating themselves. And I understand the point you make about who are the professional investigators, if you like. They are the police. But it is important, I think, that people feel when there are particularly those serious and sensitive cases that it isn't just referred back to the force itself, because people perceive that as just the police investigating themselves. And I fully appreciate the integrity of those who officers in professional standards departments, but I think this is an issue that the public have been concerned about. But as I say, we are having that overall review of the whole of the complaint system.
Would you not concede? Well, I think most people would agree with what you just said about the public lack of faith in certain investigations sometimes. Would you not agree with Jackie's point also that the Independent Police Complaints Commission hasn't exactly imbued the nation with a great deal of faith in its ability to do things from time to time? And what evidence is there that an independent body can do it any better than the police? Have you got any evidence to support that? Well,
I think it's, first of all, I mean, I said the police are professional investigators. Of course, there are people who are investigators in other walks of life, in other walks of the public sector as well. But I think, first of all, it is important from the public's point of view that they feel that there is a body that is separate from the police forces themselves, that is the body that is undertaking these investigations into complaints. The IPCC, we have been obviously reinforcing it in terms of resources while at the same time giving it these extra responsibilities. But I think now it's an appropriate time, because of a lot of the changes that have been taking place at local level as well, to say what is the right complaint system overall that we have.
Okay. I'm sure Jackie had a lot to say, but you'll understand, Jackie, if I move on, because I've got several people wanting to come in. Where's the next one? Hands up. Gentleman there, get a microphone to him, please. Oh, so whoever's got the microphone. Yes, sir. Tell us who you are.
I'm Secretary Simon Wilshire, West Yorkshire. You touched on mental health in your delivery, as did Irene. Just a plea really to collaborate with your Cabinet colleague, because there's ample evidence in my force, and no doubt every other force, frankly, people are not taking their statutory responsibilities seriously, and for want of a better phrase, buck passing. And if only to ameliorate the cuts that we're going to face, some clarity around precise responsibilities of who owns what. Because there's a lot of stuff we're doing that we shouldn't be doing, to reflect the letter you wrote to Chief Constables some time back. And I just ask and make a plea in the strongest terms that this issue is gripped, because despite the collaborative efforts and joint protocols, it still isn't working as well as it should work at the coalface.
Could you just help me out on that? Just give me an example of what you're talking about.
People not turning up for appointments, and instead of ambulances being sent routine calls to police patrols. Ambulance crews refusing to turn up at addresses where a previous history of violence has been the case, but the person's long moved from the address. I don't see why we should be mopping up that kind of
I understand.
issue.
Thank you for the clarification. I need help there. You with it, I'm sure, Home Secretary.
Yes, thank you. And can I first of all say, I mean, I thank you for the input that we've had, as Irene mentioned in her speech, from this association in relation to mental health. It's always been one of the issues that it's consistently come up when I sit down with a group of police officers and speak to them. This is the one consistent issue that comes up, which is why we've been doing some work on it. And we have made some progress, and I think we should acknowledge that some progress has been made. The street triage pilots, where they have occurred either from where the centre has encouraged them or where local health and police have got together and put a pilot together, are showing some real difference in the number of people who are being taken to police cells as a place of safety. That's better for the individual, and it's better in terms of police resources and police time. But there are still some areas where we need to work on, and I fully accept that. We've got the review that we are doing with the Department of Health, and when that comes out, it'll be interesting to see what further issues they identified within that. There are a number of aspects. I mean, the question of ambulances, I know this is an issue that the Met has consistently raised, which isn't just actually about mental health issues. It's about, so often they feel that they are just being used as the ambulance service rather than the ambulance service. I had a meeting, as it happened yesterday, with Commander Christine Jones, who is the National Policing Lead on mental health now, and we were talking about the variety of issues that still need to be addressed, and indeed about the other question, which is where we've made progress so far, how we can embed that and make it sustainable into the future. Department of Health have been helpful in this area so far, certainly on the mental health issue. They have put some extra funding in, they are supporting this, but I fully accept the point that you make that there is still some more work for us to do.
Okay.
And can I just make, I mean, one of the interesting ways of issues in terms of looking at this interface between police and ambulance, of course, is if we did have 3 blue light services together, it might be possible actually to make sure that we were seeing a rather better use of the various assets than happens at the moment. That
may be the subject of another question, we'll see. Over here somewhere. Yes, tell us who you are.
David Snelling, Metropolitan Police. Home Secretary. As I understand it, yesterday the Chief Constable of Cheshire, who was recently an Assistant Commissioner in the Metropolitan Police, took to Twitter to state, "Butt the trend and set performance targets." Apparently, the Chief Constable has now retreated into the Twitter bunker. In London, we have been set a mayoral reduction target of 20%. I will welcome your insight into, firstly, performance targets, and secondly, your influence on police and crime commissioners and chief officers.
On the first point, I mean, I've made my position on targets very clear. I made it clear at the first ACPO conference, as it was then that I spoke at, that I was abolishing national targets and just set the aim of cutting crime. And I am conscious that what has happened is, and particularly in some of the annual policing plans now across the country, you see forces with quite a lot of targets in them. The reason I have a concern about targets is that I think often targets can skew behaviour, and people end up working to the target rather than necessarily working and doing what is necessary in a particular local situation. It's why I abolished the national targets. All too often, I think the problem was police having to work to deal with address the national targets, because you only got sort of brownie points if you came up to the national targets, rather than actually saying what works in our local area.
So just forgive my ignorance, but is it not within your gift to actually instruct a force like Cheshire, if it needed is Cheshire, not to do this?
No.
No. Simple as
and
that.
That's
but you can express your disquiet, presumably.
Yes, that is the whole point, and it's the whole point of the directly elected police and crime commissioners, is that they are now the accountable representatives at local level for what happens in their area. But one of the issues that I have been very clear, I mean, you heard me say it in my speech, one of the aspects of our reform is about trying to give more power back at local level rather than the Home Office deciding everything. So the Home Office won't decide which particular area you've got to police more than any other particular area. It's up to you to decide that in the local force.
But it strikes me that if you are suggesting at national level one thing and police and crime commissioners at a local level are suggesting another, we've got a recipe for, if not chaos, we've got a recipe for a not very effective force, haven't we?
Well, no, what we've got is a situation where at the local force area, people will be able to make a judgment as to whether the police and crime commissioner was right in actually taking that
Ultimately. Right, more questions. We've got a lady down here. Yes, let's have a lady first, and then you, sir. We've got a mic for you. Thank you very much.
Joanna Young, Metropolitan Police. It's a little bit coming back to the question about police investigating corrupt officers, and it's a little bit linked to the targets and not telling chief constables what to do. We see on the news in the media that if an MP or a chief exec of a private sector has done something wrong, there's a great cry for their resignation. And then when they resign, they're seen to have been doing the honourable thing in resigning. And some of them still go on to face criminal proceedings or even inquiry, so they're still held to account, but they are allowed to resign. And yet now we're saying that police officers can't resign. Surely the issue is that if they have committed a criminal offence, they face criminal proceedings, and they can still be stopped from joining other forces, but their resignation doesn't make sense. Linked to the bit about not telling chief constables what to do, I'm not sure chief constables want to keep on their payroll officers who they'd rather resign or retire. Sorry, but my question is, that seems to me to be a bit of an anomaly.
Well, the point I would make, and I was trying to make earlier, is I think at heart a very simple one, which is that the circumstances that you set out in other environments is of people resigning and possibly going on to face being made accountable for their actions. The problem was that what people saw was police officers resigning or retiring and then not being accountable for their actions. And you know, we have seen evidence of them then being able to join another force, and then in one particular case, which is well known in public, then problems occurring as a result of that. So, and it's that issue of making sure that whatever happens, that the action will be followed through to identify whether that officer was indeed guilty of misconduct, and whether they were guilty of such that they should be on the list that says that they should not be a police officer in any force.
And is the distinction for you that he's a public servant, whereas the guy she's talking about, who incidentally may also walk off with a huge payoff, but nevertheless resign, the issue for you is this is a public servant you're talking about, therefore he or she should be accountable. Well,
it's I believe in people being accountable for their actions, wherever they are. But this was trying to make sure in this particular instance where there was a mechanism which enabled police officers not to be held to account, because the process was stopped in terms of if there was a misconduct inquiry, the process was stopped, making sure that that misconduct inquiry would continue, so you can identify whether that individual is somebody who has behaved in a way that means that they're not suitable to be a police officer any longer.
Are you okay for a couple more questions? Yeah. Well, let's take a couple. We've got one down there. Gentlemen, you've been waiting a long time. Stand up, sir. Tell us who you are. Then you, Matt.
I'm James Andronov from West Midlands Police. Home Secretary, given the recent election of a new PCC in West Midlands following the death of Bob Jones and the calls for the resignation of the South Yorkshire PCC, what are your reflections on the replacement and or removal of PCCs partway through their first term of office?
Well, we set in the Act, of course, we set some a set of circumstances in which, if PCCs are guilty of particular offences at a particular level, then they will be disqualified. And obviously we have the Police and Crime Panel that can hold PCCs, scrutinise PCCs in relation to decisions that they are taking. Obviously, I have to say that we've obviously had the election, as you said, in West Midlands. I mean, Bob Jones wasn't of my political party, but he had over many years given many years of considerable public service and for a significant number of years, not just as local council, but also in service to the West Midlands in relation to policing and security of the West Midlands. But I think that when we put the Act through, we put certain requirements in relation to, as I say, disqualification of PCCs in certain circumstances, which I think is absolutely appropriate. There are other issues around. We're looking at the moment at the question of recall of members of Parliament. Some people have said that should apply to police and crime commissioners. The circumstances that are being set for MPs in terms of the sort of triggers don't actually apply in terms of police and crime commissioners. But I think there is a debate to be had at the moment about that whole question of recall about elected individuals.
So you think there's the possibility of change, or you're contemplating, you can see the reasons for it?
I think there is a debate to be had around this. I mean, we're obviously moving in Parliament at the moment on the recall of MPs, you know, we'll be looking at certain triggers that would enable that. The circumstances are different in relation to PCCs.
Very interesting. Matt, I'm afraid you're going to have to be the last one. It is Matt, isn't it? It's hard. It is Matt, yeah.
Matthew Nichols from Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire collaboration. So it's a very quick question, Home Secretary, on pay and conditions. I wonder whether we should take any hope from the proposed 10% pay increase from MPs.
It was sort of inevitable. I think it was sort of inevitable.
Well, I'm going to say, I'm afraid I don't think you can take any hope, because I don't agree with the 10% pay increase for MPs.
But, all right, let me put the question to a slightly different level. You can see that people, not just police officers, but other people's sense of injustice, can't you? I mean, I think you probably agree with me when they see that kind of pay increase proposed for MPs and everyone else either having their wages frozen on 1 or 2%.
And as I've just said, I don't agree with the proposal that is there from members of Parliament. The Chancellor has said the same. It's one of the things we've tried to do over the years is to find some system that actually works in terms of MPs' pay. We thought that the independent, obviously with IPSA was set up, and it's now come up with this proposal, which many people just don't agree with.
But the short answer to Matt's question is no, he can't take any hope from that, can he?
That's what I said. You can't take any hope because I don't agree with the 10% increase for MPs.